Alright, let's refurbish and ebonize this table. Getting right into it here, we're using the orbital sander to remove the top layer that was a previous finish and lacquer from the old table. I wanted to go with something a little darker to match the aesthetic of my living room. I didn't want the table to be an eyesore, and also this table just had a lot of markings and gunk buildup from the previous owners. So here I'm just sanding off that layer and it's revealing a beautiful grain and craftsmanship underneath. This really wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, even using an 80 grit on the orbital sander. I don't know if it was just a really thick layer of lacquer or just the grime over time, but each spot needed to be passed over many times. So just be glad this is sped up. So with the top sanded now, I needed to take care of the underside of the tabletop and then also the legs. Luckily the legs are bolted each with 2 bolts, just using a standard Allen key, which made it really easy to remove and work with them. For the underside of the tabletop, it was quite difficult to get into all the corners. I would have had to use a corner sander for that. But with what I had, the orbital sander, I did as much as I could, making sure that I am not rounding over the top edge of the tabletop, but still getting rid of the previous finish. Is very similar to the tabletop to sand the legs. I was just paying attention as to not round over the corners and maintain those sharp edges. Now with all the surfaces sanded, at least the ones that I did want to sand or that were accessible, it was now time to ebonize. And the process of ebonizing is pretty simple. It's using a metal-based dye to stain the tannins of the wood. Typical stains are simply a chemical deposited onto the fibers of the wood, whereas here the metallic dye is interacting with the tannins of the wood, making for a deeper stain and a longer lasting stain. I use the black dye from Transtint, which requires a specific ratio of either water or isopropyl alcohol to the dye. So you can actually get a lot from a small 2-ounce bottle. For example, here I hardly used a quarter of the dye bottle. For the first pass of black dye, I used a brush foam. This took some time and wasn't very efficient for the tabletop, but was really nice for underneath the tabletop to get into each one of those intricate grooves. And then I just did the same thing with the legs. The brush foam was actually very inconsistent for application or to make it look even, so in a sec you'll see me just pouring it all and using nitrile gloves. At this stage I let the solution dry on the tabletop, and when it was dry I went over with a rag to remove any debris or flaking. I used a spray-on clear coat to seal in the final finish, but I think in the future I'll probably use a liquid, so like that there's a more clear finish. That said, I did do what I could with what I had, so I kept going with the spray, and I also brought it indoors so the wind wouldn't affect it as much. Then I just assembled the legs. And that's that on that project. I was really excited to learn about ebonizing, and I really enjoyed the process of refurbishing and sanding off that old layer of gunk. I'm curious to hear your feedback. Thanks so much for your time. Have a good one.